Hello and welcome to Growing Tech Fast, the Org3D podcast. We speak with people from the tech startup space about their experiences, journeys, and the things they've learned along the way. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Pat O'Brien. Pat is currently president at INDUS.AI. Pat, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Adam, it's my pleasure as well. I'm glad to be on. Looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thanks for joining us. So, Pat, for the benefit of our listeners, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing at the moment, what you've been doing most recently?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, maybe a little background is helpful, and I promise not to blab on too long and put any of your listeners to sleep. Wouldn't want to do that. So, I happen to have an engineering degree from a school out here on the west coast of the U.S. called UC Berkeley. But my friends, at least once a month or so, will go outside, look up in the sky, put their hands together and say, thank God that guy doesn't build the bridges we drive on, or the cars we drive in. And that's because I got into sales early in my career. And it really was a situation where I didn't, my mom was a teacher, my dad was a doctor. The idea of getting into sales was like, why would you do that? But people told me, hey, Pat, you've got sort of a bit of an outgoing personality. You're, have a little bit of aggressive sort of personality. You should try sales. And so I did. I sold in the early days process control equipment. So I used some of the things I learned in school actually. But I quickly realized, having living here in the Bay Area, that I wanted to get into tech and software specifically. And I also had an ambition to be a founder, to start a company. I always had, even in school. And so I realized starting with startups and going to work for young software companies was a great way to sort of scratch a couple itches, right? One was to do something I turned out that I was decent at, and two, learn about what it means to work at a startup. And so I progressed in my career. I worked for a company that many folks may not know called Motive, that was eventually bought by Alcatel. But I became really, really good at selling, right? I learned what it meant to be good at selling. Not to toot my own horn, I for a while was making over $1 million a year selling software. And I honestly didn't go into it thinking that anything like that was ever in my wildest dreams possible, or even having that be my goal. It was always learn to maybe start my own business. But I became a student of selling along the way. I geek out on all things enterprise sales. And then I realized, maybe 15, 20 years ago, that, gosh, if you want to lead a company, if that is your ultimate ambition, then you need to progress beyond just a pure sales role. And so I took progressively more or increasingly larger responsibilities, from a director of sales to a VP of sales to a CRO. Some of that's title inflation, honestly, but then eventually now I'm the president of Indus. And I came to realize a few things along the way. I still love sales, but one thing that is interesting about startups is you can be very tactical and strategic. And in fact, as a leader, you have to be. When companies get bigger, it really does become much more all strategy for the folks at the top. And things get very naturally and understandably segmented. The thing that appeals to me about startups is you have an opportunity to sort of leverage a multitude of skill sets, both, I would say, vertically and horizontally, right? Both in terms of the various roles that need it, and also how deep you go in those things. So I've been in a leadership role at startups for the last 10 years, enjoyed the heck out of it. I've been a part of wild successes and wild failures. And I couldn't enjoy it more. And I think one thing I realized as an individual contributing salesperson, it really is about you, right? And your sale and your quota. And I think that's great. And early in my career, it was great. And it was, both, professionally and financially rewarding. But I soon realized where I got the most joy is helping others succeed.
Sure.
And when you get into a leadership position, it does become more about that. The personal satisfaction, personal wins are still there too, but it's mostly about helping others. And in the beginning, it was more doing that for salespeople. So I had some experience managing and hiring in sales organizations, but now it's more broad, including customer success, the product org, and marketing.
Right.
And so now I'm the president of INDUS. It's exciting. I'm a big believer in sort of the power of AI, and I couldn't be more excited. And frankly, I don't, even if I find that magical windfall of financial rewards, I don't know that I'll ever stop being involved in this because I just dig it.
Fantastic. Love it. That's great. It's a lovely story. Thanks, Pat.
Yeah.
So, look, I know you're super passionate about sales. I was reading a blog that you posted on LinkedIn, where you challenge some conventional views on sales. So I was keen to just hear more about some of those. Now, I think one of those, which is kind of an age-old debate, really, but one of those was that anyone can be taught to be a great salesperson. Okay, that's a view that some people hold. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I guess my take, quite simply, is I totally, utterly disagree with that. And look, we live in a world where I'll call it the self-help era, or anyone can do anything. And not only do I think that's a little off, I think it's a bit dangerous. And I mean, not dangerous in terms of anybody's going to die, I don't think, but dangerous in terms of telling folks, children, frankly, anyone, that you can be anything might send people on the wrong path. And the examples I use are more obvious, but there are many, many subtle examples as well. And the obvious ones, I'm a deep sports fan. I played sports as a kid, particularly basketball. But can you imagine telling someone who's 5'5" and not that athletic, hey, if you work hard enough, you can play center in the NBA? It's just not possible. We're not born with the pieces to do it. It doesn't matter how hard they work. And so telling someone that, hey, anyone can play center in the NBA, or anyone can be a concert violinist, or anyone can be a world-class comedian, stand-up comic, it's just simply not true. And sales is no different. Now, you don't have to be one of the top 100 salespeople in the world to have a successful sales career, but there are certain talents, certain innate realities about people who are successful in sales, I believe at least, that differentiate them. Now, I can go on and on about this subject, and I won't here because I know we've got just a certain amount of time. This does not mean that things like hard work, work ethic, personality, ability to get along with folks, all those things don't matter. You could be the most talented person in the world in anything, sports or otherwise, but if you're just a moron or inept in dealing with people, it won't matter. The greatness is layering that hard work, if you will, and attitude on top of talent. That's where you see greatness in any field. And so this isn't to say you have to be one of the best in the world to be successful in sales. It's not true, but you do need to probably have some of those innate talents to find demonstrable success. Okay.
And so what would you say those talents are? What do you see as being the core traits of, and the natural traits of being a salesperson?
Yeah, and I think we could talk a little bit broadly about sales in general. I think, just for the sake of both my experience in this discussion, I'll focus a little on enterprise sales, in particular enterprise sales at startups. I know that's a little bit of a focus of your podcast. There are three, right? There are three things I've just observed in my life, in my career, that are true of people who are exceptional at sales that are hard to teach. The first one, in my mind, is sort of a extraordinarily high level of curiosity, insatiable curiosity. And we may talk about that next, but what that means when someone has that, where they can't help themselves but satisfy their curiosity, what do? They ask questions, right? And we'll talk a little about great selling, but great selling really is a discussion. It's not a monologue. And if your tendency is to go into a monologue, if your tendency is to pitch, you're probably not going to do exceptionally well at sales, because it really is more about the person on the other end. And so you need to understand what drives them, what motivates them, what's interesting, what initiatives maybe. Anyway, there's a whole host of questions. So that's the first one. The second one is what I'll call rapport. So we've all met these sort of folks. They're just people who have an ability to establish rapport both easily and quickly. Great salespeople just have that. And some do it with a sense of humor. Some do it with this sort of genuine, maybe the curiosity again. I've gotten to a place in my life where I used to think it was just a certain profile. It's not. I wouldn't prescribe style. But you can see there are people who struggle a little bit to build rapport and those who don't. And especially when you work for a startup, you have to build that rapport quickly. You have to have the person on the other end say something like, hey, this Pat guy, I don't know, he might end up being full of, you know what, but he seems to have his, together. He must work for a company he wouldn't go to work for a company that's a fly-by-night. I'm going to give him a little time, right? He's earned the right based on his ability to build some rapport with me to have a discussion. If I'm working at Salesforce or maybe Oracle or some other even lesser known companies and I slide my card across the table, that rapport is essentially instantly created for me. I don't have to do it. The last one is what I call drive. And I don't mean personal drive. That's a great attribute, a great talent. It's a great thing to have. But I mean for sales, ability to drive. So any of us who've been a part of enterprise sales will have either done this or observed this, which is a room of 10 people, 8 of whom work for the prospect or company you're focused on selling, maybe a couple of folks who are on your company, none of whom actually report to the salesperson. But guess what? Who's driving the discussion? Who's suggesting who should do what? And if you've done sales long enough, you see it time and time again. There's just, people who have to listen to me because my title is president. And then there are people who can drive a discussion where nobody actually technically reports to them, but they still get people to do a bunch of stuff. And that's a talent that not everyone has. Those are the 3 I would say I would highlight.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I can't disagree with you on those. I think that they're all definitely key traits. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, would you say throughout your career you work with people or come across people who you've seen be successful, but perhaps aren't natural salespeople? Then are you saying those people don't exist, or?
No, I'm not saying that. Actually, in fact, if you listen to those traits, I didn't say outwardly gregarious. I didn't say super polished presenter. I didn't say some of the things that I think the average, we'll call it layperson, average Joe on the street might say, well, that person, that lady, that guy is a great seller. Because those things, while they aren't a negative necessarily, are not the indicators of great success. And I would even go further and say the danger, if I happen to be a great presenter, I can get up in front of a room and dazzle. My tendency when I am in situations that might call for some of that is to try and get in front of a room and dazzle. And there are situations where it helps to have that skill set. But if that's all you do in selling, if that's all you're doing is presenting and dazzling, you're not going to sell much, I promise. It's just not how it works. You need to, drive value. I mean, we could talk on and on about exactly what happens in sales. When you think about what happens in sales, it is really connecting your value prop to the things that matter to the customer. And if you haven't figured out the things that matter to the customer, you can't make that connection.
Sure. Yeah.
So yes, there are people who you might look at and say, not so gregarious, not so polished, not so handsome or good looking, all those things that we might typically associate with great sales, who are wonderful salespeople. And I've had many work for me.
Sure. Okay, good. Like it. And so something else I wanted to talk to you about was obviously most people, a lot of people actually, not everyone, but money is a factor for why we enter this profession.
Yep.
Okay.
No, come on, salespeople don't care about money.
So,
right.
So that's a huge draw to going into sales, and probably quite often why maybe some people who aren't natural salespeople want to become salespeople to have that chance to earn above average income. Now, something else I read in this blog that you wrote was how money isn't necessarily the kind of the number one motivator for people. And perhaps there's probably more, I guess, intrinsic motivators there that could actually be far more impactful. So yeah, let's talk a bit about that then.
Yeah, this is a fascinating one. I mean, I'm an intellectually curious guy. I read lots of things about lots of subjects. And when I see something, especially when it's what I'll call research-based, fact-based, study-based, analysis-based, we'll talk about spin selling or tangential selling. And in this case, a talk by Dan Pink, I gravitate to it. I think, wow, that, not only is that maybe not what conventional wisdom said, but it's supported by research and science and facts, frankly. And the overwhelming research is extremely fascinating, which is that at a certain point, not only is money not a motivator, it can be a dismotivator, which is, you go to folks who are talking about commission sales and you scratch your head and say, Pat, dude, you put the bottle down or whatever, like you're talking crazy talk, man. But Dan Pink, and if anyone gets a chance, did a wonderful TED talk on human motivation. And basically what it says is for really simple tasks, increasing the money reward can have a positive impact. But for the complex tasks, after a certain point, it actually is a detriment. And there's overwhelming research and evidence for this. So, and when you really think about it, I have an example. So you think about, all right, Pat, so that's interesting. What does that mean in terms of sales? The truth is, commission plans are what you use to help attract and retain talent, in my belief. So, if I can do the same thing and everything else is equal, then but one place I'm going to make more money, well then, yeah, I'm going to go there and I'm going to stay there and they're treating me well. What's going to motivate me, what's going to get me sort of excited about the job is going to be those other things like career enhancement, like being a part of something bigger than I am, like being an organization where I like the people I work with, like having a boss who I think really has my best interests at heart. These are the things that actually help motivate people. And I give an example, and again, I've been a part of organizations where the commissions have become extraordinary, right? Potentially millions of dollars. And when you're talking about 10%, and you're selling millions of dollars of software, the numbers get pretty big. And I always tell people, can you imagine a salesperson? And they're working on a $10 million deal. And this happens, maybe a little less now than it used to, but it does happen. They're working on a $10 million deal, and the commission plan says they make 10%, which means they would make $1 million if they close this deal. And so, first of all, just ask yourself, how hard is that salesperson working to get that? And I think all of us can take a wild guess at how hard. Now, let's say you went to that person and said, you know what, we've decided, Pat, let's say I'm the sales guy, we really want you to close this deal. So what we're going to do is increase your commission by 20%, which would be another 200 grand. So now I say, you know what, I honestly wasn't working that hard before. I was sloughing off $1 million, whatever, $1 million. Now that it's 1.2 million, now I'm really, that's not how people think. They don't, right? If you just take a step back, at first you might think, of course, more money, more motivation, but that's just not how people think, right? At a certain point, it's enough. And so, frankly, the money might be spent elsewhere. Again, this isn't to say that you want to pay below market. That wouldn't help either. No. But money as a sales motivator, and frankly, I would believe for any complex job, it's more about retaining and attracting high-end talent than it is motivating people to do certain things. Okay. So I highly recommend that Dan Pink TED Talk if folks who are listening get a chance to take a look.
Yeah, definitely. I've watched that myself. I know he talks a lot about purpose and autonomy in roles. I mean, where have you best seen in your career, perhaps, these intrinsic motivators best used, and how was the best way to do that? So how do you go beyond just money? What's some interesting things you've seen?
Yeah, but a lot of this stuff we're talking about, to me, like eventually it rounds to what I would call common sense, or what people in the US here call, motherhood and apple pie sort of things, like, oh yeah, sure. But when you really boil it down, some examples or answer to your question, examples, for example, that I've seen work, and I really tried my best to do it as well, is just ask people their opinion. Like, hey, this sounds maybe counterintuitive. We're going to sort of tweak the comp plan, Mr. or Mrs. Salesperson. I'd like to get your thoughts about that before we do it. Like, ironically enough, when we just talked about motivation, hey, we're thinking about entering a new market. And I'll use the salesperson one because this is a sales focused podcast. We're thinking of entering a new market, right? So you think like a sort of go to market, product related decision. You go to the salesperson and say, what do you think about this new market we're trying to enter? What do you think about these new folks we're trying to hire? Just caring about what their opinion is. Sure. It's amazing how much that motivates people to stay, to perform. Like, they really care about, hey, you have a career. Maybe you don't want to be a salesperson your whole career. What is that career trajectory? What are those ambitions? Let's talk about them. Oh, I didn't know that you want to do this or that. Maybe I can help you. Look, I would hate to lose you because you're a fantastic salesperson, but I believe what goes around comes around. If there's something I could do to help you in your career path at those ambitions, let's talk about it. Maybe I can, maybe I can't, but I'd love to try if I can. That sort of thing. And I think a lot of people do that, but it is amazing how impactful that can be. And I honestly think the difference between two people who are performing exactly the same, who are both equally exceptional, making the same amount of money, I think the difference between one that you do that with and one you don't could be stark in terms of their attitude, their belief, their likelihood to stay at the company. That kind of thing, I think, can overcome the other challenges. Because let's be honest, every startup has lots of challenges, some existential, right? Threats to the business at a core, and that can impact people's motivation. And so you have to offset that sometimes. And we talked a little about money not being the only or even a perfect way to do that. And that, therefore, you need to have these other ways. So I've seen that work time and again. I think there are plenty of other examples, but just sort of caring about the person. And it sounds so, like, wow, it's touchy-feely, but it works. And, obviously, if you're a little bit of a psychopath and just truly don't care about other people, well, maybe that's going to be hard for you to do. But most of us innately care. And so I would just say exercise that caring. It's not all about the numbers. And I've seen that work. And by the way, I like to talk about this stuff. It's not that I'm a perfect practitioner of this myself. I wish I was, but I do try.
Yeah, good. Okay. And if you reflect on your career and just taking money as a motivator, how would you say that has motivated you? Would you, earlier in your career when you're a younger guy and you were fresh into sales, what was it all about money? Has it become less important now? And other things, the purpose matters to you more now? Or how would you say kind of career, your stage in your career impacts on what motivates you?
Yeah, that's fair. I think that career arc, and I imagine it's like that for a lot of folks. I would say I was a gunner, right? I was show me the money, where's my check, when I first graduated. But I can tell you that, for example, the reason I got into sales is one, I thought I was good at it. And it turned me on a little bit, not the money, honestly. And the reason I went to startups is because of this ambition to, at least what I tell people when I go to startups, Steve Jobism, it's put a dent in the universe. Have my chance to put my little small dent in the universe. So those two motivations, and it's just the honest truth, even when I was 18, 22, were the things driving me. Eventually, the money became really interesting. And to be honest, in some ways, maybe even a distraction, because I got into it. My plan was maybe to go get an MBA. And then it was like, well, I'm making a lot more money than anybody who's going to get an MBA. And I don't regret any move I made. And obviously the money was great. And it's, in some ways at that stage of your life, it's life-changing. But yeah, I think I'm at a point now, and I always have been, I think at a point now where I see it more clearly. And even the choices I've made even more recently in my career are not always about the place where I can I'm Silicon Valley, and I can tell you about all kinds of companies I've had conversations with. There's a company that most recently got a ton of buzz, Snowflake, that's, tens and tens of billions of dollars, printed billionaires and many, many more millionaires. There are examples of that all in Silicon Valley, but sometimes that's just not the right thing, right? And in my experience, those kind of big companies, you just don't have the chance, at least like someone like me, to have the impact I'm hoping and aiming to make. It happens at more of an early stage company. So I'm making the conscious decision to forego that possible ultimate upside. I'm not to say like it's a walk in the park or you just walk over and you take jobs and you get $10 million. It doesn't work like that. But I consciously have foregone maybe that more clear, obvious path to the pure financial reward for the chance to, play a role where the impact's broader and where I touch. So yeah, I think it was true before. Maybe the money mattered a little more than it did 20 years ago. But even now, I think the motivation is more about that, make an impact and some of those things, that Dan Pink talked about.
Sure. Interesting. All right, Pat. Well, yeah, thanks for that. Look, we're actually almost out of time here. I can feel like we could talk a lot longer on this.
Sure.
But I guess before we kind of do conclude and wrap things up, what I'd like to finish with, really, you are, a Silicon Valley veteran. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What you obviously reflect a lot about sales and the careers in sales and everything, and it's really, you speak with passion about it. What I guess what pearls of wisdom would you pass on to somebody coming into sales or considering maybe even a career move and they feel like that's for me? What's your advice just to anyone really who's considering a career in sales, a career in tech, in the startup world? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't know about pearls of wisdom. I'll do my best, but just a few things, and we touched on them. One, just broadly, look, I would tell anyone, I have a daughter who's going to graduate from school, and she happens to get into sales, and I joke about this a little bit. Years ago, I tell her what I did, and she'd go, "Oh man, your job is so boring." And then some of her friends started getting a job in sales, and they started making lots of money, and all of a sudden, I was cool again. It's like, "Dad, tell me about sales." And, "Hey, Dad, I know you're doing this." And now she has a job in sales, very ironically. And I would just say, find your calling, right? Find something that we talk about talent you're good at, you have passion for, and excites you, right? And I'm not saying most jobs are pure, just like a trip to Disneyland. That's just not how the world works. But I can tell you there are things for most of us that are just things for some of us are really a better fit than others, right? And then vice versa. And so the kinds of things you have to do when you're a doctor or a salesperson or a leader or a coach or whatever are just different. And so I would just tell people, be honest with yourself, look in the mirror, do that self-assessment. To answer your question more specifically in sales, look, sales can be a wonderfully rewarding and obviously wonderfully lucrative job, just outsized. Early in your career, later in your career, I tell people, if you become good at sales, you'll never have to look for a job in your life. You know this, you recruit, right? The good salespeople, they have to put their phones on mute.
Yeah.
But it can be a little stressful, and it is a job where it truly is, what have you done for me lately? So I would just say, be honest with yourself. But if you've got those talents, you believe you have those talents, I would say go for it. I would argue there could be no better job in terms of the combination of opportunity to sort of get those rewards, both financial and career and intrinsic, as well as work-life balance you can eventually find. So I would highly encourage anyone who's thinking about it and thinks they might have some of those talents to make it go. In terms of high tech, look, I happen to believe, the Mark Andreessen thing, software's eating the world. I play in software. That's not all of tech. I think I would recommend anyone, and this is not to say a job in construction, which is a space we're in now, or a medical field, or that aren't also super interesting. But at least for me, what tech can do, what software can do, is just innately exciting and intriguing in a way that other fields aren't. And so that too is something I would highly encourage folks to dive into. And so obviously a career in sales and tech, you can satisfy and scratch all those multiple itches and check a lot of boxes. So yeah, be honest with yourself. And the last thing I would say, again, it's a little motherhood and apple pie. Be willing to take risks. And I don't mean be reckless, But sometimes the best things are on the other end of taking a little bit of a risk. Not massive, crazy risks. I'm not saying jump off of a cliff without a parachute. But I do think playing it safe, entirely safe, it could be, when I look at myself, and it could be one of those things you look back and go, oh gosh, I wish I had maybe taken, everyone has a different risk appetite, but that would be maybe the final piece of advice is, if some of those things are true, if you're not sure about sales, again, in my own autobiography, if I had told my parents before I made the decision I was getting into sales, they went, Pat, what are you doing? You have a big time engineering degree and you're not a doctor and all that. But in retrospect, I said, God, that was the best choice you could have made. Again, not for everyone, and maybe that's not the career choice for everyone, but maybe it is. And sometimes you got to take a risk to see. And I encourage folks to do that when they've been thoughtful about it.
Great, love it. Listen, Pat, thanks so much for that. It's been an extremely insightful conversation. It's been great hearing your thoughts on all these topics. So yeah, thanks again. I hope everyone listening has enjoyed that. Let us know your thoughts. How important is money as a motivator? What makes a good salesperson? And I guess what risks have you taken in your own careers? So let us know your thoughts. Pat, thanks again, and we'll see you on the next podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Goodbye.